Hi, everyone. Welcome to the School of Reinvention podcast. I am your host, Roger Osorio. I help parents and corporate reinvent themselves into first-time, purpose-driven entrepreneurs. I teach entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania, and I am the author of the book, The Journey to Reinvention, How to Build a Life Aligned with Your Values, Passions, and Purpose. I am excited today to be joined by Tania Luna, who is the author of Lead Together, Stop Squirreling Away Power and Build a Better Team. She is also an entrepreneur, psychology researcher, and writer. Tania has founded and grown multiple purpose-driven companies, including Scarlet Spark, a nonprofit that creates human-friendly workplaces for organizations that help animals, and Life Labs Learning, one of the fastest-growing leadership development companies in the world. Her other books include The Leader Lab and Surprise. She's also a TED speaker and lives in a micro sanctuary with 324 rescued animals and one human partner. Tania, you are totally enjoying quite the purpose-driven career. Just by skimming your LinkedIn, it was so clear, and I think to anyone, that you have consistently reinvented your career and life into alignment with what mattered to you at any given moment. And everything you've done in your career truly reads like something that connects with your purpose at one time or another. You've gone on, obviously, from launching one purpose-driven venture to another, and that makes you so ideal for the guests of this podcast, because I believe they're sitting perhaps in a corporate role right now, thinking about doing some of the things that you've done in your career multiple times. Tell us a little bit about just overall, like reflecting on that kind of a journey and building that kind of a life over the last couple of decades.
Whew. Thank you for that question. And thank you for making space for this conversation and this pursuit. First, I would like to correct a horrifying typo, which is I live with 34 animals, not 324 animals.
Wow. Well, there we go.
Must have been a typo on my end.
Wow, that's a big, okay, there we go.
You said that and my heart just skipped like 3 beats.
34 like, that's
so
crazy.
Far.
I'm like, that's quite the sanctuary.
Yeah, I would not call that a micro sanctuary. So not quite there yet.
Awesome.
Okay. For your actual question. So, well, I'll start by saying that I was really delighted and surprised when you reached out and seeing your work and seeing your show, because I don't really, advertise myself or my career as purpose-driven. So it was really cool that you were like, that you saw that by looking at the different stops along the way in my life. But actually, since I was quite young, I want to say probably late high school, I started kind of compulsively checking in with myself and writing down, what are my values? What is my purpose in life? What is my mission in life? And how are each of the things that I'm doing connected to my values and to my purpose? And part of it was I have a yes default in life, meaning someone says, hey, do you want to do this thing? Do you want to help me with this thing? Do you want to start this thing? And I go, yes. And that has been the case for a long time. It's got benefits. It's got downsides. But I think one of the reasons I started getting really clear on my values and my purpose was probably even by the time I was in high school, I was quite overwhelmed with all of these things that I was doing, these schemes, pursuits. I had a pretty much full-time job since I was 16. So I wanted my values to guide me in understanding what to truly commit and say yes to and what to say no to. And since then, I think really every few years I pause to recheck in and go, what is still really meaningful to me, and how can I use that as a filtering mechanism to decide where I'm going to put that energy.
Yeah, one of the things that I didn't even mention in one of the patterns I observed was that you spend a significant amount of time in each of these chapters of your life. It's not like something you just kind of do on a whim and then you're out in a year or two. You spent, I think it was about 7 years with Surprise Industries, I think about 8 or so with Life Labs, and now you've been with Scarlet for a little bit. So it sounds like there's some significant alignment that also causes you to feel that fulfillment for an extended period of time. Like you're very serious about that. And I guess the reason I bring that up is because I feel like that how that's the outcome of knowing what those values are, so that you can say no to all those other possible distractions that can get in the way.
That's fair, and I appreciate that. Yeah, because I spent about 6 years teaching psychology. I spent about
Yeah.
8 years doing research. So yeah, you're right. But what doesn't show up on my LinkedIn profile is that by the time I was, I want to say 25, I had had over 20 jobs. And so really early on, I did do the hopping around and I did do the cycling
Yeah.
through, because I think that was less for figuring out what my values are, but that was figuring out what am I good at and what do I want
Yeah.
to get better at and what is draining for me. It's
Hmm.
not like I was, abandoning all of these jobs in my wake. I think I did it
Yeah.
respectfully, but there was definitely a lot of either hopping from one thing to the next or having like 3 jobs at the same time. And
Yeah.
looking back, I mean, part of it was just survival because I needed the money.
Yeah.
But a huge part of it that was incredibly lucky is learning about myself and what environments I do well in, so that then I could create the sort of Venn diagram of what do I value, and then on the other side it's what am I actually both good at and want to continue getting better at.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that early period. I mean, I definitely noticed it there, and obviously, in the interest of time, I thought, where do I focus? But maybe you
Yeah,
can
and I don't
sum
know how
up
much I
some.
confessed on LinkedIn.
Yeah, but you did have a few roles in there early on that were shorter, shorter periods of time. Just maybe give us like a little bit of a high level overview on some of those roles in the sense of like how they related to getting into writing, because I can see that writing and surprise industries became like two major things that you spent almost the same amount of time in each.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about how you went from a little bit of that hopping and kind of lots of things maybe together to, okay, here are two big things that I'm about to really dive into.
Yeah. And writing, I mean, I think that's probably been the most consistent one, right? So I've been
Yeah.
publishing probably for, I'm almost going to be 20 years. So
That's right.
that has
Actually,
been
I
the
was
most
referring to
consistent.
I was actually referring to your teaching job. You were
Okay, okay,
teaching
got it.
and doing surprise industries like
Yeah, yeah,
right
yeah.
at the same time.
Yeah, and the
That's
thing
what I
is, I'm
meant.
still teaching, right? So that's another one that's
Okay.
been really, really consistent. I just started off teaching at the university level, and now I teach for companies. So, oh my gosh, you know me
Yeah.
better than I know myself, Roger. So, yeah, writing and teaching, really, really consistent.
Yeah.
So, how did that come to be? I think that a big part of it is just wherever I was. And, early on, it was like assistant gigs and executive assistants. I was very often in really tiny startups, in part because I tend to move quickly and I like the pace of startups. I also am drawn to probably environments where there's some degree of chaos. And so the nice thing about that from a learning about myself perspective is that whatever your title is when you join a startup, especially if it's a really tiny startup, you're going to be doing a little bit of everything. And and I worked for lots of different. I worked for tech startups. I worked for solo ventures. I did sales early on. I worked in research for a while, in psychology research. I worked in a neurofeedback clinic. I mean, like all sorts of places.
Yeah.
But in all of those, I found myself kind of, if I paid attention to where was I providing the most value, it was probably three things. One was the writing piece. It was, okay, how do we get the chaos and complexity of the startup life into the simplicity of a message you can transfer to someone else?
Yeah.
The other piece of it, I don't know that I ever thought of it as teaching, but it was getting ideas across. It was, again, like going from this idea lives in one person's mind. How do we scale that and make it accessible to many people? And I found myself just very driven by that. And I think the third piece is I really am driven by going from idea to reality. Like there's probably nothing more delightful and compelling for me than seeing something that is imaginary turn into something that I could see and touch and interact with. And I don't know, that technically that's probably like project management skills combined with just like stubbornness to go, nope, this seems impossible, but I'm going to figure it out because I really want to see this idea come to life. So that's another thing that's probably I've had a lot of practice with throughout my career.
So, then you make this commitment, these bigger commitments, perhaps at this point, the biggest commitments in your career to go to launch Surprise Industries and to take on your first real, like, I guess, teaching role, the big teaching role, at a university. Tell us a little bit about making those decisions, and then and I also want to talk a little bit about how you brought Surprise Industries to life, the inspiration, and then of course a little bit about that launch.
Yeah. So I remember this very viscerally because I had thought right before going to teaching and right before starting Surprise Industries, I was 23 at that time, and I had spent about 4 years doing research in psychology, publishing and conducting research. I was also working full-time, and I already had a job in kind of sort of touching organizational psychology. It was in organizational development and leadership development. And I thought for sure that I was going to get my PhD, and that I was, as a result of getting my PhD in organizational psychology, I was going to get to teach, I was going to get to consult, and I was going to get to start a business, start a company. And I was like, okay, I've done the research thing. This is my path. This is what I'm going to do. And then my sister and I and a friend of ours, we randomly had this idea for Surprise Industries. And the idea was you sign up for an experience and you get something, but you don't know what it's going to be until you get there.
Yeah.
And I just really fell in love with this idea, and I could talk more about that if you want. I know I'm answering these questions because they happen together in my life.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I fell in love with this idea, back to purpose-driven and values-driven, of what if we can create this thing that seems like fun and playful on the surface, but it's really training for embracing uncertainty and embracing the unknown in our lives. I really wanted to fight against this impulse toward familiarity and safety that I think keeps us stuck. Of course, we need some degree of safety and familiarity, but also when it comes to the ideas we allow into our minds, the people we allow into our lives, and then, that willingness to deep dive into a dream or a passion, it requires some degree of, if not comfort, then at least a familiarity with uncertainty. And so I really fell in love with the idea of Surprise Industries and applied for some reason for this young female entrepreneur grant through, I want to say CoverGirl or something like that. It was like something ridiculous. I mean, no offense to CoverGirl. It's just, this is not where I thought my career
it wasn't like an entrepreneurship magazine or like
exactly.
the Wall Street Journal or American Express.
And I didn't know startup people. I didn't know business people. I was like deep in the psychology lane. And so I was like, someone told me about this. So I was like, let me put together this grant this contest proposal. And we won. And we got $10,000, which at the time might have, for me, was like $10 million. I was like, $10,000? How are we ever going to use all of this money? And that was the year that I was going to start my PhD program. And I remember this moment. Viscerally, it felt like, I sometimes described it as standing in front of these two doors, and I opened one door and all I saw was darkness, nothing, just this corridor of mystery. And I opened the next door and bright lights. I could see all the way down. Here I am doing research. I know what the academia path is. It's going to be safe. It's going to be pretty good. It's going to be stable. And it just left me feeling meh. And the other door with the total blackness, my heart was like racing and I felt sweaty and nauseous and uncomfortable. And so something in me was like, go down that path. You can go in that direction. Partly I had wonderful people in my life who nudged me in that direction. Actually, Joaquin Roca, who's now on our board of the nonprofit, I was his research assistant. And I was like, I should do the PhD thing, right? And he said, okay, you want to teach, you want to start a business, and you want to do consulting. Can't you just do that now? And I was like,
there you go.
And so I actually talked Hunter College in New York City into giving me a course to teach, even though I technically didn't have the credentials and they said no, but then the person who was supposed to be teaching canceled last minute. And because I had been bugging them about it and pitching myself, they called me, I think 2 weeks before the semester started, and they said, do you still want to do it? And I said, yes. Okay, I'll do it.
Of course.
Yeah. And so from there, I started teaching. I got to, start my startup. And then eventually I started doing some consulting. And so I never looked back to going down that path of academia after the research experience that I had. I actually continued to, Hunter allowed me to start a lab. I was able to actually conduct and publish my own research through that. So I got this weird oblique way into some of those things that I was passionate about. But it was that moment of going, which of these things is unknown and which of these things is more terrifying, and let me go do that thing first. And I can always come back to the familiar, well-lit door.
Yeah. You know what, a couple things that stand out. One is that powerful question, can't you just start consulting, teaching, doing all those things now? Yeah. And of course, a well-placed question like that just disrupts all of your assumptions and everything that says to you, well, no, you can't do that until you get a piece of paper that says that you can do that. And then just going out and asking, being turned down. But hey, as life would have it, hey, somebody, fell through. And now they're wondering, oh gosh, there's no way we're going to get a pro to do this, because with such short notice, they're never going to say yes to prepping a class last minute. Maybe we can get the person who's not a pro, doesn't really know what she's getting herself into, and will probably say yes right away. But you know what? If that's the door, and that gets you in, and you're like, you went for it because you knew what you wanted, and you were like, boom, I'll find a way. I'll figure out the rest. I'll build my class as I go. Probably, it's probably what you did at the end of the day.
I mean, I was literally, I'm so sorry to any students who might ever hear this, but I was like reading the textbook, the night before they were reading it, and preparing the curriculum the night before. But yeah, I love the way that you just frame that. It makes me picture this, almost like a labyrinth where you assume that you need to go around and around and around, but actually you can just move the labyrinth or just jump over the labyrinth. And that's what that question did for me. And I think partly it helped that I was very clear on what I wanted in terms of values, but not in terms of the exact outcome or solution. And that's come up again and again and again in my life as helpful, because I think if I said, I want to teach a psychology course, that is success for me. My first course that I taught was not psychology. It was something called first year seminar, and they gave me 6 of them. And I taught in I'm pretty sure what used to be a broom closet. I mean, it was hard and weird and not what I thought not what I thought my path forward would be. But it was that allowed me to get a whole bunch of really positive student reviews, bring it to the psychology department and go, see, I know what I'm doing. And then that next year they gave me more and more and more and more psychology classes. And so I think I know I want to make this kind of impact. I know I want to do this sort of kind of maybe thing. So having just enough of a direction, but not too much of a direction, has been really important, because that allowed me to be persistent in getting a result while welcoming a variety of what success could look like at the end.
So you said something really interesting about the magic or the power of surprise, that it is a great way of practicing getting comfortable with uncertainty. Now, this is really special and meaningful to this particular show and audience, because the journey to reinvention is all about uncertainty. You are deciding to get onto a path that cannot be predicted anymore. It cannot be written in advance. It's a lot like your life, that you get the call 2 weeks before the semester starts, and they're like, "You still interested in teaching?" And you're like, "Yes," and you go for it, and all of a sudden you begin what was, I think, a 6-7 year path in your life, all with 2 weeks to go before the start date. And so that's that uncertainty, right? You embraced uncertainty. You embraced that. You left the door open for these possibilities, and then you embraced the uncertainty of taking on such a challenge when you had never done it before. And so practicing that through surprise is, for me, what stood out about it. So I wanted to share my story of going to one of your surprise experiences. So I'll never forget this. I can't remember how it was pitched, but no doubt you sent out a thing, or I went to the website and I just signed up for an event. And it was, I pretty sure it was like on a weekend morning, I think like Saturday late morning or something like that. All we knew was the address, and all we knew was that it said wear sneakers and comfortable clothing. And I thought, well, that doesn't narrow it down. There's a million things we could do with sneakers and comfortable clothing. So I was like, all right, well, yeah, let's just go and see what happens. And I'm thinking like, okay, well, I walk into the building and the rooms are like studios, like dance studios. I'm like, this is a dance class. Oh man. All right. This will be cool. This will be fun. So the instructor walks in and now it's like, all right, cool. All right. I wonder what we're going to dance today. Like, you know, maybe it's tango or something like that. I don't know. Something really wild and exotic. And then the guy busts out a bag of swords. I'm like, how do we dance with a sword? That's a weird thing to dance with. No, this is a sword lesson. We are going to learn how to use swords. I was like, what? The surprise you feel in that moment. I mean, that was 2012 or 13. I don't remember exactly when I did it. So we're talking more than 10 years ago.
Wow.
And I still remember the room, the whole scene is like tattooed in my brain forever. The power of surprise. You don't forget these moments. They make an impression. But and to that end, like, because it's made such an impression, when I've coached people on the journey to reinvention, I have shared this experience of surprise industries and what you guys did, because I go, this is a muscle that you can develop. This is something you can practice. And in a fun way, by the way. You can practice it in a fun way. You have to learn, you have to put yourself in moments where you can embrace surprise, where you don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it's also going to be fun. So you at least know it's safe and all those good things. But it is a really great way to practice becoming comfortable with the uncertainty that the journey to reinvention brings, because you never know when you're going to get that call with 2 weeks to spare and the opportunity to teach. I had the opportunity to get into the classroom without any teaching credentials. I didn't know that was going to happen. I was hoping it would, but of course I got shot down many times like you. And then all of a sudden somebody says, I'm going to take a shot on you. Oh, this just got really real. I got to go do that. All right, we're doing it.
I know that feeling.
And of course, like you, I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. I'm ready. And you drop everything else and you go after it. And hey, teaching became a part of my life for 4 years after that, when I taught math in the classroom. And like you, I still teach in other ways. So this, the psychology of surprise, really, really important. What else can you share about the psychology of surprise? Perhaps something that most people don't know about the psychology of surprise that maybe isn't as obvious, perhaps.
Okay, so maybe I'll share a quick maybe quote or phrase from our book Surprise, me and my co-author and actually a co-founder at Life Labs Learning as well, Leanne Renninger, who did get her PhD. She did the whole thing. I'll share a quick quote that I think about sometimes, and then maybe two findings from the research. So the quote that I like to think of often is, we feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not. We feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not. And I try to remind myself of that in moments where the fear creeps in and the desire for certainty creeps in. I ask myself not what will feel most comfortable, but what will make me feel most alive. And again, we need balance. There are certainly times in my life where I needed certainty, where I was like, too much surprise, right? Let me create more of an anchor point. Let me create more routine in my life. But for the most part, I think it could be very easy to get trapped in what's certain, what's predictable, what's routine. And so to look for that aliveness. So the research that backs up that sentiment is, one, maybe I'll share briefly Leanne's research and her way into surprise was looking at what are the experiences that we don't just recall in detail, but that we recall with the full emotion. Kind of like you were just describing, you remembered the room, you remembered like the full sensation of it. She didn't know she was studying surprise. She was looking at people's most memorable life experiences. And she was working, I believe she was working with Paul Ekman at the time, either through this research or another study who studies emotion. And so they were monitoring people's facial expressions and looking for moments of joy, like authentic joy in their face. And she's doing this research. It's getting kind of boring because she's not really listening to the story. She has it muted. She's just like watching the computer readouts of, was that authentic joy? Nope. Was that authentic joy? Nope. And she's seeing with some stories, it's spiking. And with the majority of stories, it's not spiking. So she turns up the volume and she's like, okay, what's going on? What are these moments that are causing people to re-experience, relive the full sensation of joy? And it is consistently moments of surprise, including what you might think of as unpleasant surprise. So one of the stories we share in the book, Surprise, is about this woman in the study who talked about her wedding day, which for most people, they try to plan it out perfectly. They want to make sure nothing goes wrong. But the heel of her shoe cracked off just as she was about to go down the aisle. And so she had to limp down the aisle the entire time. And people were laughing at her and they stood up and they like cheered her on when she made it down to the aisle. It is not what most people would design into their wedding day, but here she is re-experiencing the full depth of that joy, that emotion. So it's not the most planned moments in our lives that tend to stay with us and become part of our stories. It tends to be those surprising moments. So surprise really recreates and gives us access to not just a sense of aliveness in the moment, but we can come back to it and feel it again and again. And a neuropsychologist named Wolfram Schultz found that surprise intensifies our emotions by about 400%. I like to say surprise makes us so happier, angrier, sadder, right? Like surprise, when it's bad, intensifies the bad by 400%. When it's good, you know, you lose $20 and you didn't expect it. You know, it's like you lost 20 times 400% or divided by 400%. Or you're the math teacher.
Bottom line is you're like, you make a much bigger deal out of it.
Times 4. And then if you find $20 in your pocket, like it's that 20 times 4. So that's something I often think of is surprise brings with it that flood of emotions. And one of the, I guess I'll sneak in one other thing from the research that I did was that emotional intensity, one of the ways that we cope with it is we want to talk about it with others. So surprise, the uncertainties in our lives, the times when we step into the unknown also tends to become our social glue. Because when we're just doing our routine things, you're catching up with a friend and you're like, what's going on? Nothing. What's going on? Nothing. As soon as you start exploring the unknown, you almost can't help starting to talk to other people about it. And then suddenly they're telling you new things and suddenly they're more eager and willing to support you through that journey. So there's something that links you to others just by inviting more of the unknown into your life.
The quote is beautiful. And this idea, I mean, I just thinking about all of the uncertainty and surprise, both positive and negative, you know, whatever it was along the way, are definitely the moments where I felt the most alive. I mean, I'm even thinking back to, I was thinking, okay, what's an example where it wasn't positive? And a little over a year ago when my mother passed away, you know, of course that was unexpected. We knew she was sick, but we just didn't think it was going to happen then, of course. And then that happens and the emotions that you experience in that moment, that, you know, I thought to myself, and I distinctly remember in some of my prayers around that time, thanking God for the capacity to feel so alive, to feel so many feelings, to feel so human in this moment. All the feeling, you know, missing her, you know, being sad, being happy for her, because I also know she was suffering a lot. And I knew that on some level, this is, you know, what was necessary and it was God's plan. But it was a moment where, again, not a positive surprise, not the one that I wanted, right? That, you know, but it was one that I was, of course, most alive in that moment. And that was preceded 5 days earlier by our baby girl being born.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
So that yet another moment where you're like, you
were lifing.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Welcome.
Tell me about it. It was, I mean, the amount of life I experienced, but also thinking about all the other things that have happened on my journey to reinvention. You know, one that I talk a lot about is when my wife and I were going through the process to get her green card to come to the U.S. and be able to, so that we can live together and that she could work here and all those kinds of things. the ups and downs of that journey. COVID happened during that.
Oh
So
my
it
gosh.
absolutely delayed it with no idea for how long it might delay it, because no one knew when this whole thing would be over and when embassies would reopen and blah, blah, blah. And so, but those were some of the most lived moments of my life. I mean, they are tattooed in me forever. Yeah. And I love the memories, the good ones and the bad ones, the scary ones where we were worried, like, is this going to come through? Is this appointment going to happen? But they did. These things came through, but man, did we feel alive. So
what's beautiful about what you're sharing is, I appreciate that you're sharing those examples, because sometimes when I say feel alive, people might assume it's like thrill seeking, but I really mean the full texture and like tapestry of what it means to, to be a part of this life. And when you were talking about that, I'm fast forwarding a little bit. Tell me if I'm screwing up your plan. Haha, surprise.
It's all good.
I'm fast forwarding a little bit to Scarlet Spark, my current nonprofit. Yeah. On the precipice of starting that organization, I'd never worked in a nonprofit before, other than eLab, which was, I was able to join as a facilitator and content designer, and not like I have to figure out fundraising. I have to figure out how to grow our team and things like that. But Scarlet Spark was the first time that I was, starting it and building it from the ground up. And it was in many ways the most vulnerable I'd ever been starting a new venture, because I care very, very deeply about animals and the relationship that humans have to animals and animals have to humans. What is our culture around how we treat animals, and do we see the animal in each other? So it was just so deeply rooted in what I believe in that it was the scariest to approach. Yeah. I also find that while I have a pretty good amount of tolerance for witnessing people's pain, when I see animals in pain, it just like crushes me. I have no defense mechanisms there. And so in many ways I was avoiding, after I sold my last company, Life Labs Learning, I knew I wanted to do something with animals, but I was avoiding it because it felt so painful. I knew I needed to look at the reality of some of the practices that we have around the world, like factory farming, where billions of animals are suffering, even though most people say they love animals. And I didn't want to look at the pictures. I didn't want to read about it. I didn't want to learn about it. But to your point about feeling like the whole feeling, I had a very specific moment where I was like, okay, I'm just going to see what I'm feeling. I'm just going to see what's going on for me. And we have 7 pigs, but 2 of them live inside. And so I lay down with the pigs, Remy and Josie, and I just like cried into their fur or hair or whatever pigs have. And they're very snuggly, so they were very welcoming and created this really safe space for me. I'm not a crier. I'm not a super emotive person when it comes to like painful emotions. And it was such an important moment for me, because I hadn't felt sadder. I can't remember a time I felt sadder. But then probably the next morning I was like, I can do this. Okay. Like, I felt those things. I didn't hide from it. I didn't try to mute or dull the pain. I now have the capacity to pursue this as a passion rather than constantly, sort of carry that pain around in me. And it wasn't going away because I wasn't really looking at it. It's like I was living with this splinter. And getting the splinter out hurts a lot in the moment, but then you actually create the capacity to heal. So I guess my point is the fact that you allowed yourself to feel the range of those feelings, and in some ways to even value and honor the most painful parts of what it means to be alive, I think opens those doors and makes them more welcoming and less terrifying.
One of the things that I share in my book is that when I define the journey to reinvention, I say that it's a journey of working towards aligning our lives with our values, passions, and purpose at any given moment, because they evolve. So as our values, our passions, and our purpose evolves, then so must other areas in our lives. Maybe it's our jobs, which obviously we spend a lot of time in those. So that's a big one that really needs it. But it could also be where we live. It could be the people that we spend time with. It could be, some relationships that are no longer serving us and finding ones that
Mm-hmm.
do, whatever that might look like. It's this constant and why. And so what I talk about is that when you do that, when you are living a life that is always pursuing, it's never perfectly aligned because you're evolving first, then you're figuring out,
Right.
okay, how do I iterate my way to a life that's in alignment with who I'm becoming? You are able to weather the ups and the downs. Like I always say, you appreciate, you enjoy the ups and appreciate the downs.
Yes, that's so
And that,
true.
and that has been my journey. And I feel like you've been living that journey where you have worked to stay in alignment. And so I think you can probably appreciate this as well. Like those moments that are really tough and really bad, they could be devastating. They could ruin our lives in many ways and put us on downward spirals. But I feel like when you're living a life that's aligned with your values, passions, and purpose, you can keep them from being devastating. They don't destroy your life. They are a part of your life. You work through them, you process them, and you come out better. And to your point, like what I shared in my stories, we appreciate those moments as well. We appreciate them as part of life. I think about going through divorce and things like that during moments on the journey, and I mean that could have thrown me completely off and just set me on this downward path. It was tough. Don't get me wrong. But in the end, I was doing work that just filled my cup every day.
Yeah.
And thanks to that work that I did that filled my cup every day, I was able to weather that storm.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I was literally just before we hopped into this conversation talking to a friend of mine about two goats of ours that are 17 and 18, which is very old for goats. They wouldn't mind me saying so. And they're getting arthritis and, they're showing signs of aging. And she was like, oh, how do you do it? I wouldn't want that to be part of my life, basically. I think she said it more diplomatically. But to your point, I was sort of like, yeah, this is really painful, but it is so laden with gratitude and joy. And I think maybe part of it is it's the difference between feeling like you have a problem that is placed on you versus a problem of your choosing, and it's like if you choose to love, then you'll choose to feel some of that pain. Yeah. But as long as you allow in both at the same time, then I think they really amplify each other in some beautiful way. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I chose this, and she's gonna get arthritis somewhere. I'm grateful that it's here with me where I can take care of her.
Yeah. I mean, this is. I love where this conversation is going because I think that these are moments that are just very real on the journey, and they're on everyone's journey, and this way of like I used to talk about, for instance, lost relationships that didn't work out. Like when I think about when I was divorced a while back, I always think of that experience as like the feelings that I felt after that. For me, as difficult as they were, I appreciated them because they reflected what this meant to me. This is an incredibly special person in my life. This was an incredibly amazing time of my life too. It came to an end, but all those, even the bad feelings, I almost felt like, wow, those bad feelings are like validation of like the good. And so I thought, I'm glad I felt that, because if I had not felt that, then what was this experience? Was it really that good? Did I really enjoy this? Did I really value this when it was good? Yeah. Maybe I didn't. But I've learned to think of those feelings that could be really painful in this way, and try to embrace them, and also just be appreciative. Just, thank God that I had that opportunity to be in a relationship with her for the time that we were. It was the perfect amount of time. It was exactly what we both needed at a moment in our lives. And then we went our separate ways, and we were able to do things because of that time together. We were able to go on the paths that we really wanted to be on. And so I mean, but again, they come with some tough feelings.
And this is making me think of, the people that I know who, for whatever reason, have a thing that they know they want to pursue, but just have been holding back, sometimes for years and years and years, and not going after it, which maybe is some of your listeners. And now that we're talking about this, I think I maybe have a little bit more understanding or compassion or a hypothesis around what might be going on there, which is the things that we care about and think about and love most, they have the opportunity to hurt us the most, right? To disappoint us the most. And even though the thing that you're most passionate about, on paper, it should look like, well, why aren't you just doing that thing? In practice, I think it is but then if I lose it, it's going to be really bad. Or if you rejected, then it's going to be really, 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 really bad. And I think that the points that you're making are so important because it's not the story of go for it and you'll succeed. I think that's a really dangerous story. And it's the only story we're ever fed. We're told success stories. We're shown movies where at the end of the journey, someone gets what they pursued. And that's not my story. I think of my life as incredibly lucky, but I've had way more failures than successes, and it has been not a straight path. It has been a very, very winding road with values as the North Star, but still this very kind of messy, winding road there. And I think starting the journey by saying, I'll only do this if I believe that I will succeed is incredibly limiting. If you say, this is gonna suck, it's gonna feel really bad, and it's gonna feel really good, and I'm gonna learn things, and it's gonna be beautiful, and I'm gonna cry, and I'm gonna hurt, and like, if you go into it going like, let's do life, I wonder if maybe that takes the brakes off or takes our foot off the brake a little bit. Because you almost definitely will not get what you want in the way that you want it. But the pursuit, the journey will get you somewhere new and beautiful and different.
Yes.
And at least from my perspective, that is very much worth it.
Yeah. I one of the ways I try to help people see what can happen when you pursue these things is I tell them about the ones that either didn't work out or the ones that came to an end in some way. For instance, my first reinvention was driven by a desire to become a math teacher. I wanted to go from selling commercial refrigeration, beer coolers actually, to Anheuser-Busch. Not teach, not anything for high schoolers for sure. Well, I mean, I'm sure some of them, used the products inside the cooler, but I was not a part of that. No. And then to go teaching math, to teach high school math. I mean, that was that journey that I spent 8 years in that world, in the K-12 education world. Wow. And then it came to an end. And I tell people that gave way to an incredible experience, which then also came to an end. And that end caught me off guard. That was a surprise because it was a layoff. So surprise, you're laid off. So surprises happen, right? And that gave way to the next chapter of my life. Yeah. The point being that I try to help people see that it's like, it's not about this succeeding or not succeeding. It's about the fact that I love saying this. This is one of my favorite things. Like, it's better to have loved and lost than to never have loved at all. So the variation of that I use, it's better to have pursued education and enjoyed it for 8 years than to not have enjoyed it at all, because it didn't have to be the rest of my life. Right. I didn't know that going into it. I just went into it thinking, I'm going to enjoy whatever I get to enjoy from this moment. And I know at least that when, that opportunity ends, or if it never even comes, at least I tried, and I probably enjoyed some part of that journey anyway. So I got some joy out of it. Your
ultimate, or maybe not ultimate, but the destination you're going to reach that you love more than any other place you've ever been often lies at the end of you pursuing the thing you thought you wanted and that thing not working out. Yes, or you pursuing a thing, getting it, enjoying it, and then being like, that's over now. What's the next thing? We tend to imagine life as A to B, but it's a crooked path. And without pursuing that first thing, you might never know about that second and fourth and 12th thing that lives somewhere around the corner where you can't see it from where you're currently sitting.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. I mean, I think about how the teaching career led to Startup Weekend, an event that I got heavily involved with, an entrepreneurship bootcamp 3-day event, where then I became a global facilitator for that event. And that led to other opportunities where all of a sudden I'm teaching entrepreneurship. And I'm like, wow, this is a path I never could have predicted, imagined, scheduled, or even set as a goal.
Yeah.
Like I just never thought to set this as a goal. But along the journey, I remained open to this surprise opportunity. I participated. I enjoyed it. I decided to learn more. I continued going. And, you know, that came from being in the education world. Connections in that world led me to that path. And that created other opportunities where then I was able to work for 4 years at IBM as an executive coach.
Wow.
Did not predict that. I had not asked for that. I did not say that's the next step. But to your point, right? Like, it all started because I pursued education, and all these other things became a part of my life, and education will still always be a near and dear relationship to me. And it still is. I mean, I still teach at 2 universities, so I'm still teaching. I'm just not teaching math, but teaching math, it will always be one of the most special relationships that I had in my life. It was an 8-year relationship. I always say that I was married to math for 8 years. I taught math. And look, we parted ways. We went our separate ways. There was a moment where it was like, okay, this is not working out for me anymore. I think I'm going to go this way.
I'm get sure into math felt the same way.
Yeah, and math probably thought, hey, exactly, I've got to move on too. So this is the journey. But I love this because thinking about this in the context of the psychology of surprise, thinking about it in the context of embracing uncertainty and feeling most alive, all of these moments, which we're sharing, you know, both your stories and mine, we could not have predicted these moments. We could not have planned these moments, which by definition makes them all surprises as along the journey. But we gave it a shot. And to your point about, you know, being afraid to not get something that we really feel passionate about today. I mean, that's kind of the point, is that it's that fear that signals that this is something we care a lot about. We have to at least try, is the way I see it. That was what inspired me to quit that first corporate job back in 2008. It was simply that I said, I just need to know. Look, I'm not saying it's going to work, and I'm not even doing this because I believe it's going to work. So that's not the mission here. The mission is that I will get on this path and I will give it everything I can. And then I will see what happens. And look, I couldn't predict the rest of that journey. And I did get a little time in the classroom, but all these other things came, you know, which landed me at a TEDx event, and I'm meeting you. You know,
and like, that's how we met. I was going to say, it made me think of 2 things real quick. One is research on the power of wonder. Literally just saying in your mind, I wonder, makes experiences more enjoyable. Wow. And oftentimes we kind of go, is this going to work or not? Pass, fail, versus, oh, I wonder, you know, like you said, I just need to find out. Let me just explore. Let me just find out. So if we can even activate that in ourselves, and it could be as simple as just saying, I wonder, I wonder, I wonder. So that's one, is wonder is a very close cousin of surprise, is just inviting more of that wonder into our minds. The other thing that I'll just say is that I think one of the beliefs or perceptions about some of these things we're talking about, like pursuing the thing that you're passionate about or pursuing your values, might, even in the stories that I've shared or you've shared so far in this conversation, might sound a lot like jumping off of a cliff. I should also add, I think, that some of these little experiments and explorations could be very small and on the side of whatever your main stable thing is. Yes. Like, there were times in my life where I couldn't just quit everything I was doing and start a business because I had financial responsibilities. You know, my family wasn't paying for my college. I had to pay for my college. I was living in New York City. Like, you know, I mean, that's my own fault, but you know, I had expenses, and there are plenty of people who have obligations that don't allow them to just go, I'm going to bet it all. And there's a fair amount of evidence that going all in isn't actually necessary for success. There are plenty of really successful organizations. I think Warby Parker, who's a former client of ours, is a great example of, they were just testing things kind of on the side and seeing if it would work. And so many of my own things that felt like huge shifts were actually as a result of little pilot tests and experiments and tweaks, subsidized by something more stable and predictable. So you don't have to go all in. You don't have to dive into the deep end. You just have to dive into the deep end emotionally and say, I wonder what will happen if I pursue this, at least to some small degree.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about when it came to math, I tutored on the side.
Yes,
I had
that's
my
a great
full-time
example.
job and I tested to like, all right, if I don't enjoy tutoring, I'm probably
Hmm.
not going to enjoy teaching, especially
Hmm.
full-time. So tutoring is a way to start that path. And,
Yeah.
there's always something there's a way to experiment on the side. And like you, I feel the same way, because I grew up in a circumstance where, yeah, I needed to work and I couldn't just take these leaps,
Yeah.
without worrying about
Yeah.
financial or anything. I had to think about all these things.
Bills
Even
are
when I quit in
real.
2008. Yeah,
Right.
when I quit in 2008, I had to
I
have a
also went in
plan.
2008.
There
Yes,
we go. Well,
what a
I
bad year
put
to
it
start.
was
Yeah.
a bad year or a good year, the best
Or a
year. You
good
know how
year.
I saw it? I saw it as the best year because you know what? When I
Mhm.
tell this story, I always say that, well, and then the market went to hell. So turns out there was really nothing better to do than to reinvent myself. So, it's not like
True.
the opportunity cost went super low because
True,
everyone's
true,
laying
true.
off. I'm like, well,
That's
everyone's
true.
laying off. So it's not like there's a really cool opportunity to be had in corporate. It's actually pretty
Fair.
bad right now. So
Yeah,
I'll
that's a
enjoy
great point.
everything else that I can get done during this
Yes.
time.
All about the
But
reframe.
yeah, but yeah, like I had I put a plan together, and I always advocate that you got to think about that. But there's a lot you can do outside of that day job. There's an
Hmm.
experiment you can launch. There's a project you can bring to life. There's a way to dip, your toes in that water, and then
Yeah.
maybe even get your feet and ankles in there too while
Hmm.
you're at it. And you don't have to quit your job in order to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
One of the
I'm glad
best.
I appreciate you
Yeah.
mentioning that.
Yeah, I was just going to say as a quick example of that, the job that I mentioned in organizational development, it started off, this was a company called Snippies that I'm so, so grateful for. They gave me my first job when I was 16. Not, it wasn't my first job.
Hmm.
I started working even before that, but it was my first like big deal job where I was like saving money, and I was a videographer. So I used to go around and interview people on camera and ask them questions that were used for market research. And there was no reason that they should have taken the chance on me other than potentially they were slightly desperate and I was at the right place at the right time. I had little business cards that I had like cut out of paper. And it said like idea person, I think was my job title that I gave myself at age 16. Anyway, then I was doing sales for them. I was doing some marketing stuff for them. And I was studying psychology in college while I was working at Snippies. And I said to my boss, like, can I do some psychology stuff here? And he was like, okay, what do you want to do? And I was like, well, can I try doing some team building? Can I measure our engagement and see if I can improve our workplace experience? And he was like, okay. And he let me do that. And I asked, and that combination of ask and try to see if you can find someone who's willing to take, like you said, take that shot on you and try to make it a small ask so that
Yeah.
it's easy for them to say yes. But that was my way into testing out a lot of the things that later on I ended up doing professionally. Or I volunteered and I did things for free where it was hard for people to reject me because the offer was so good. Like, hey, do you want this free thing? And that also allowed me to, do something meaningful while learning and also then
Yeah.
building some credibility.
I love what you just said. I mean, that connects back to what your part of your journey when you asked for that teaching job at the university, right? You asked. Like, it's such an important
Several
step in all of
times.
this. Yeah, you have to ask several times. You really never know what might happen, right? So it might just start there. There's so many possibilities. There was a guest I had who always talked about, we usually think of things in terms of like this or that, A or B. Like there's only two choices.
Yeah.
He's like, there's probably like a million variations in the
Yep.
middle. And
sure.
if you open yourself up to those possibilities, and sometimes all it takes is asking. Sometimes you don't even have to conceive the middle option. If you
Yeah.
ask, someone else will say, have you thought about this? And you're like, oh my God, that sounds even better than this or that. I don't have to
Absolutely.
quit, and I don't have to stay. I can do something in the middle. Let's do it.
Yes. Yes.
So
true.
absolutely, that the asking is so important. I wanted to talk about you have a podcast. You mentioned writing has been a part of your life for a very long time. And I think a lot of my listeners are also thinking about perhaps writing a little more, creating some content, maybe launching podcasts. Just tell us a little bit about your podcast and in your blog with Psychology Today, because these two, when I was researching this, they cross over. There's definitely some alignment and intersection with them. And I thought, ooh, I love this. A lot of 2-for-1 wins here.
Yes, I do try to.
And I
look
love how
at the
you
two
embrace
rooms.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the podcast came out of, such a strange impulsive moment. I'm always looking for ways to sneak in spending time with my husband while also pursuing one of the other things that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
And somehow we came up with this idea together for Talk Psych to Me, which is a podcast where I bring some topic in psychology, whether it's, like we did one on what is toxic positivity, or maybe it's something like we did one on like the psychology of the 7 deadly sins and what is each of those, the psychology of each of those. He's the funny one. He's the storyteller. He makes fun of research and kind of makes it much more grounded. And I focus on the research. And so that was a really natural content creator. I would, prep the episode and then afterwards go, oh, well, let me turn this into an article. And Psychology Today was another one of those where I saw that you could ask to have a blog on Psychology Today. And so I was like, can you give me a blog? And I'm pretty sure they said no at first. I think that might have been another one where I had to follow up a few times. And then eventually they were like, yeah, do it. And both the podcast and the blog, what's interesting about those is that neither seems particularly useful if you look at it kind of episode by episode or article by article. Some things that I'll put out there will have like 400,000 views. Some will have like 100 views. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Is anything coming of this? But if I zoom out in aggregate, they've each been this really cool door opener. My book that I got published, the first one and the second one, came out of having the Psychology Today blog because an editor at Wiley saw some of the blog posts and was like, oh, this is interesting. Do you want to write a book? My first book, I had to spend a year looking for an agent and sending all these query letters and doing all this stuff. And this, it's like an opportunity sparker. You never know what's going to come of it. And if you judge it based on, was this very specific, thing that you wrote or thing that you produced useful? Usually the answer is, I don't know. But on the whole, it's been incredibly valuable as just bringing people into my life that I wouldn't have had access to or connection with, or reconnecting with amazing people like you. I also think it's just a space to play and experiment and, try new things. And I think having those playgrounds in our lives is incredibly important to just see what emerges. And maybe something will be, just fun, and something will be your next big thing that you want to dedicate your effort and energy to.
Well, I think this is a perfect stopping point because this is very actionable, what you just shared, very approachable. And it's something that anyone, especially with all the technology available today, we can all pursue and begin putting some of our ideas out there to see where they might go. If nothing else, we develop our own ideas from writing. So, it's a win-win no matter what happens at the end of the day. Exactly. Tania, thank you so much for your time, your stories, the insights, helping unpack surprise. So many cool things I learned. And I think and I love what you said about we are the most alive when, we experience these moments of surprise. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was truly, I felt very alive through this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the School of Reinvention podcast. Again, I'm your host, Roger Osorio. If you're ready to start your journey to reinvention and want to walk the path with others, visit www.rogerosorio.com and go to the School of Reinvention to check out for yourself how a community-based coaching platform can help you begin your next reinvention. You can also go to rogerosorio.com to purchase my new book, The Journey to Reinvention, and receive some exciting bonuses. Until next time, make your day great.